Welcome to another Ideas That Matter conversation. I have here somebody who I've interacted with a number of times and been following in social media, who just crossed a really important milestone. And this is George Grombacher, who is a financial consultant. He's the president of Financial Consulting Professionals, LLC, and also the chief community officer of Money Alignment Academy, which maybe you can tell us about in a little bit. He's also the author of 3 books: The Purpose Book, Your Guide to an Examined and Aligned Life; Be Your Own CFO, A Business-Like Approach to Your Personal Finances; and How to Get Good at Money, The Keys to Financial Peace of Mind and Prosperity. So I think people can see a common theme running throughout these, but he's also the host of the Lifeblood podcast, which recently passed the 2000th episode mark, which is quite an achievement for any podcast, let alone one that is putting out content, I think 5 days a week, right? So with
7.
You're doing every single day. I thought it was just every business day, but that is an incredible level of productivity. So George, do you want to say anything about this milestone to kick us off?
Simply that it's sort of a weird thing. If you were to tell me you're going to do 2000 podcasts, be like, wow, I don't even know how I do that. So looking back on it, it's pretty obvious. You just do it every day for about 4 or 5 years. So it's certainly something I'm proud to have done, and it's been an awesome experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a podcast, but my podcast is just taking old video episodes and editing out ums and ahs and long pauses and things like that. You're doing original content every single day. Now, granted, with guests, but that raises its own sort of wrinkles, right? Because you got to do all this coordination and figuring out who you want to talk to. And the podcast, as we're going to talk about, has an incredible range of topics in it. So maybe let's start here. How do you go about figuring out who you want to interview? Do you do research like daily or weekly? Is there like a roster of people that you're looking at?
So the show started out just being about personal financial matters, because that's what my work is. So
Right.
it was, I started a podcast in 2016 with a buddy just as a hobby. I didn't know what podcasts were prior to 2015, which kind of sounds weird today because they're so ubiquitous. But back then, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know what they were. I found them. I'm like, these are awesome. How cool. They're free. There's a podcast on anything. You can listen to them anywhere. They kind of go along with you. And it was before I had kids, so I had all this free time. So I thought I'll start a show. And that was also no small feat. Today, it's really easy to start one. Back then, it was a little harder. So I figured out how to do it. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll start one for my work. You mentioned I do financial stuff. And so I started at just talking to other financial advisors. I thought I'll interview really smart financial people and bring their ideas forth, try and serve people that way. With so many things in life, we struggle and we're ready to learn things when we're ready to learn them.
Right.
So I thought, okay, I'll try to bring good ideas out. And that was sort of what my thought process was. So to answer your question, yeah, back then, again, not everybody was accustomed to being a guest on a podcast. So it was kind of a weird thing. So I would research and I'd go on social media and Twitter and try to find financial experts or financial advisors. And I'd try to find their email or connect with them on LinkedIn or something like that. And I'd reach out and just invite them to be on the show. And early on, that was very time consuming.
Oh, okay. But now is it, I mean, you've got repeat guests. I've noticed that, but have you sort of like built up a whole network of people that you want to get in on things? You know, like I've got that person pegged for this topic over here that I've wanted to talk about for a while, or.
So things shifted when I made the decision to broaden the show from personal finance to just general human flourishing. That's how I refer to the show today, as we're a show about human flourishing. So how do I help people get better so they can live the lives that they want? That's the idea behind the show. And so that gives me the opportunity to talk to people, just about any kind of person, about whatever they're most excited about. And so it went from, as the show grew, people started to reach out to me and say, hey, I'd like to be a guest on your show.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
that got to the point, well, yes and no, because it kind of made me lazy,
Okay.
where now I was just busy doing versus figuring out who are people that I really want to have conversations with. Now, don't take that the wrong way, because I really enjoy 98% of the people that I have on the show. But I'm getting now back to the point of, let's be a lot more intentional about
Okay.
reaching out to people to talk about Islam or to talk about artificial intelligence, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I was scrolling through like the most recent 100 episodes or so, and it's a vast variety of stuff. But there is still this theme of finances, and as you know, as you put it, people ideally living a good life, and finances are a key part of that. So I was going to ask you about this later, but it's a good opportunity to jump into this. What is the connection? I mean, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, money, you know, you shouldn't be prioritizing that. You should be thinking about all these higher values. But it really, you know, it is hard to live a good life if you're constantly in debt, or you know, having to go for lower options for yourself because you have to scrimp and save. So what led to that transition from, you know, we're going to focus on money, talk with people who are really interested in and talented in managing money, to that realization that this is an important component of a good life.
So, several things. From a very, very, very practical standpoint, I wanted to start doing the show more,
Okay.
and I was getting tired of only talking to financial people. So I need to broaden this. I'd like to be able to talk to people like you. So I just needed to expand the show and the different things that we were talking about. And doing the show got me back into writing again, just because it got me back into thinking again as
Okay.
I was preparing for guests. And not that my brain was dormant, but a lot of the thinking part of my brain were kind of dormant. I was just in this career, which has been an incredible career,
Yeah.
but of
Yeah.
just doing financial stuff, which is extremely interesting and important work, but can be mundane. So my brain started working and thinking, and I started just exploring things personally. I started to think about my beliefs about money, and that led me to beliefs
Mm,
about relationships and all the different aspects of life. And to your point, is like, why focus too much on money? Well, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. But when you start thinking about one thing, you realize, oh, it touches everything else. And
right.
how is this impacting all the other aspects of my life? And it just got me going on all this stuff. And so it's been a journey of self-improvement and self-discovery and lots of self-actualization and all this stuff that I've gotten to go on. And, when you do the show every day, not that I do it 7 days a week, I release them 7 days a week, I'm sort of getting 20 minutes with my guests, and I'm
Yeah,
getting kind
right.
of their
Yeah.
greatest hits. I'm getting some of their best ideas, and then I go out through the rest of my day and I think about it, and it sticks in my head, and it gives me an opportunity to ruminate and ponder on everything. So I don't know if I answered your question there.
No, it's actually a good segue into something connected to that. I mean, one of the things that you have in your podcast, which is quite nice, they are short, which I think is helpful for people, but they're not like 5 minutes, so you're getting something substantive. But you do ask your guests to come up with like one thing that you can do to improve your life, and I'm curious. Is that something that was there from the very beginning with these financial advisors that you were talking to, or is that something that kind of crept in as you started thinking about, not just money, but life more broadly? I think it's a great feature, especially closing with it. It ties everything together after these, pretty deep conversations. So is that something that just emerged in your thinking about the podcast?
As I was trying to figure out what I wanted the podcast to be, the kind of show that I wanted to do, I try and start with the end in mind and
Okay.
think, okay, I'm going to do the show and I want to do it frequently, how is that going to work? And how much time do I want to spend doing this? I love listening to long form podcasts. Your Joe Rogans of the world, your Lex Friedmans of the world. There's so many great podcasts
Hours
from,
and hours and hours. Yeah.
yeah, which is super cool. And part of me would like to be able to do that, but from a practical standpoint, I can't do that. And certainly if I'm going to do as many as I do, then I can't do that either. So it's more of a pragmatic thing. And I also wanted to be somewhat formulaic and make it pretty repeatable.
Okay.
So
So people know what they're going to get,
people
right?
know what they're going to get. The guest knows what they're going to get when they sit down and talk to me. I know the conversation we're going to have, sort of at least the framework of it. So I open the show essentially the same way. I end the show essentially the same way. And 20 minutes is, to your point, it's not 5 minutes, but it's also not an hour. So there's a little bit of a sense of urgency, but enough time
Yeah.
to let ideas breathe a little bit.
Have you had some guests who didn't respond well to that sort of time pressure? Let's wrap it up, folks. I mean, you could have like the wrap it up music that you put as a sound effect, right? Where they're used to talking for hours and hours, and they come on and they're like, "Well, I want more time." Has that ever happened? Or
Yeah, for sure. For sure. There's some 45-minute episodes that are floating around out there. So, and I'll let people go so long as I don't have somewhere to be.
call time or something.
Right. Like, you need to stop talking, sir or ma'am. That
Yeah.
is enough.
Yeah, with these conversations, usually they're 45 minutes to an hour and a half. But I did have one guest who is a good friend of mine. I'm not complaining about him in any way whatsoever, but he's very, very difficult to cut off a conversation with. And it went on for about 2.5 hours of recording, and we talked for at least 15 minutes before that as well. And I've learned sometimes I need to make sure I schedule something ahead of time so that there's a good hard break.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of upfront, just setting expectations,
Limitations. Yeah.
expectations, and
Yeah.
that's true. And I try and set them up in as many different kinds of relationships as I can, with my kids, with when I'm having a business meeting, whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
Do you need to do that with the podcast sometimes in terms of content? Like, we're not going to go here, so don't bring that up. But everything else is fair game. You ever have to do that, or or is it more you simply say, listen, we're going to focus in on this. You make it more on the positive. What's going to, instead of saying we're not going to do this, you say we're going to do lots and lots of this.
I don't normally set that kind of parameter. I'll ask people if they have any questions,
Okay.
and then they will say, well, that'll sort of get them talking. Or if they have a practical question, they'll certainly ask that then, or they'll say, you know what, I really want to talk about this, or I don't want to talk about that. And I always let people know. I say, the show is very straightforward. I'll introduce you. We'll have a great conversation about you and your work. At the end, I'll give you an opportunity to direct people wherever you want to send them.
Okay.
And we'll go for 20 minutes. So I don't want people to feel like they need to plug something
Right
that they want
away.
to
Yeah.
plug. Like, I'm going to give you time to talk about your business, book, website, whatever.
Yeah.
But I
So
never want people to feel like there's anything that's off limits. And I want to be respectful of people. So if there's something that is off limits, I'm not interested in asking them about it.
okay. So you've got all these umbrellas. If the site too is actually quite nice because you've got all these categories for the podcast episodes. And as you said, you started out with wealth, with finances, and then there's a tab for health, lifestyle, relationships. I forget all the different things, business. There's a lot of things on productivity and how to sort of think out your life. But I noticed there's a lot of episodes on what we could call broadly philosophical ideas. So just recently, you've got one on modern wisdom. What actually is wisdom, which is a tough thing to pin down. You ask philosophers and you get different answers about that. But one that I thought was particularly interesting is this: alternate realities of you. And it starts out thinking about the multiverse stuff, could there be, it's like possible worlds. Are there other yous in different places? But then it suggests that we could be in conversation with ourselves. Now, this is deeply philosophical, and this seems to be, I won't say it's like the main topic, because you've got a whole bunch of different topics, but there's a depth of analysis going on in here. So I would imagine some of my academic philosophy friends, who can be a little bit elitist, snooty, dismissive of other occupations, particularly business, right? They're the ones that when they have business majors in their classes, they're like, oh, these people, they don't care about anything. So let's take a minute to sort of like dispel that stereotype that people who are interested in business per se, right? And then people particularly who are doing money management. So financial advisors, accountants, they're just, they're boring. Their work is, kind of, as you said, mundane. It's flattened out. They're not interested in the big questions. That's totally false, right? I mean, there are some people who they're only interested in the bottom line, but what have you, I mean, you've been working in the business world for, I'm guessing now, more than half of your life at this point. So what has your experience been? Do people, every once in a while in the, the boardrooms or wherever else you're meeting, bring up philosophical topics and start exploring them? Is this an underside to the business community that philosophers, humanities people just don't know about unless they get involved with it?
Probably yes and no, right? And of course, the answer is it certainly depends. There are probably the majority of people are not interested in having these kinds of conversations, but there certainly are plenty of people who do. One of the things that the show did when I was only talking to financial professionals was it really restored or gave me a new hope or faith in the field, because I did talk with so many people who are very, very, very thoughtful. Now, financial services is a model. It's this massive thing, right? Yeah. It's giant. And a lot of it is cutthroat and does not care, unfeeling, disinterested in that more returns, profit, that.
Right.
And then there's human beings that are interacting. I have a hard time with statistics, Greg.
Okay.
It's like, oh, look, 55% of Americans are doing this. Well, if I thought about people like that, then I would have no hope for humanity.
Okay.
There is an example of a company that I work with. They have like 3,000 employees. And when I go and talk to the HR folks, they're like, oh, this is an unwieldy thing. I can't steer a battleship. How are we going to make changes? The only way that I can approach my work, and my work is helping people get better at money so they can live how they want, is to assume and go into every interaction that this individual that I'm talking to has the capacity and the ability to change their life for the better, should that be something that they decide. They can change their story. They can rewrite their future, so they are not destined to be in this 55% or 70% of people that will never be financially successful. So within the financial services industry, this behemoth, yeah, there are certainly some that are more philosophical, more thoughtful, that are more interested at least, will entertain some of that squishier kind of touchy-feely stuff that I enjoy talking about.
Yeah, and it's I mean, we don't have to have this massive like wall or opposition. I think that from my side, a lot of academics do tend to impose on that. We sometimes lose sight of the fact that the people who I'll say idolize as important philosophers often were entrepreneurs. You think about Aristotle, for example. Now, his dad was a doctor. It doesn't hurt to come from some money, right? Especially if you've got powerful connections to the court of the people who are going to conquer everything shortly. But he started his own school, couldn't actually own it in his own name, so he had his buddy basically be the person to be the, what would you call it, owner of record, and he studied everything he wanted to. And of course, he looked down on working people. But he was interested enough in how human affairs work that he wrote about just about every aspect of them that he could, including economics, if the book that's attributed to him is actually by him, which means household management at that time, but it has to do with larger affairs. And I think that gets lost sight of. And so sometimes, unfortunately, there's the stereotype of, oh, these people are only interested in these things that do matter, but don't really matter that much. They lose sight of this. And going back to Aristotle, so when I teach Aristotle, as I'm going to do again this semester, we'll talk about human happiness. And one of the things I do like about his view on that is, being virtuous, very important. You got to be fulfilled in life, you got to be doing good things. But he also says you don't have to be super rich, but you do need to have some money, or else you're going to be unhappy. If you're stuck living on the street, the Stoics would say, oh, you can be perfectly happy even being tortured on the rack. But I think most people look at that and they're like, no, that's crazy talk. Aristotle's a little bit more realistic about it. And so actually, let me lead this into a different thing. And you might not have an answer you're happy with for this, but so thinking about just today, let's say we froze, which is a total counterfactual. We froze the economy today so that everything is just kind of stuck in place and prices don't go up, wages don't go up, everything stays more or less the same. And so you're also not getting a rate of return on investments either. Or if you are, it's exactly the same as it was, yesterday. If somebody wanted to set themselves up for a good life in retirement at this point in time, let's assume they're going to retire at the age of 65, how much would they actually need in order to have all the things that money can provide them with? They can buy what they want to buy within reason. They're not buying a yacht, or vacations to the Mount Everest or something like that. They need to have enough set aside for problems that are going to arise. Maybe they need to have money to take care of kids and grandkids. How much do you think a person, if you had to pick like just a number out of the air, what would
$1 million.
That would be enough for
I think
retirement? So. Interesting. Okay. I was imagining a much higher number. So why would you say that?
So there's a lot of, it's one thing to save money and then another to turn money into actual income. I don't think that I want $1 million in my 401k because I want that. I want to have $1 million in my 401k because I can turn that $1 million into an income that will last for as long as I need it to, that will sustain the lifestyle that I'm interested in having.
Okay.
So you think about if we were working at GM back in the day or Ford back in the day, we'd work there for 30 years. We would retire at 65, get a crappy gold watch, and then we'd have our pension.
Right.
And so that was valuable because we didn't have to worry about it. Okay. It was money that was just hit my bank account every month. So essentially, you could take that $1 million and turn it into about $70,000 a year for the rest of your life, whether you lived 10 years or you lived 50 years. So that's a
sort of constant rate of return, because we've already assumed nothing's going to change. Yeah.
You got it. You could use a very, very, very basic financial product called an annuity. And people have feelings about that one way or another. Right. I'm just telling you what it will do. Probably give you 7%. So if you put $1 million in, it'll spit out 70 grand forever. So there you go.
Now, once we reintroduce like risk into the equation, a lot of people throughout history, they want money because they feel that is going to insulate them against the various risks of life. When you're dealing with people, I mean, obviously we think about financial transactions in a schizophrenic way because we're like, oh, this is just hard numbers, the numbers don't lie. We've got all these sort of mottos about that. But a lot of people's financial decisions are emotionally driven. and emotionally motivated. Sometimes they're driven in the spur of the moment. Oh, the stock's going down. I better sell all of mine, which is a terrible decision, right? I got to get in on the frenzy before it craters. But there's also longer term stuff. And so you've been dealing with people in this respect for a long time. Obviously, fear is one of the emotions that is driving people, but what else is driving them emotionally?
It's such an important thing to consider. And Daniel Kahneman wrote his seminal book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he won
Yeah.
the Nobel Prize. He was the first. I think if he was a psychologist, he won it in economics, or he was an economist and he won it in psychology, whatever, kind of vice versa. And one of the big takeaways that 90% of the decisions we make around money is based on emotions. So that's pretty wild. And you think, oh, there's no way that I do that. And you start to think about it. You're like, oh yeah, wait. Turns
Yeah.
out a lot of my decision is based on emotion. So becoming aware of that, and then paying attention, being mindful of what it is that we're thinking and feeling, and then recognizing it and taking a more logical approach. Yeah, you got it. It's like, why doesn't everybody want to talk about Bitcoin when it's at $15,000 a Bitcoin? It's crickets. When it's at 70,000, everybody wants to talk about it. So it's
Right.
exactly what you were just describing. A lot of us, and this is myself included, I kick off every time I get in front of a room full of people. I say, I'm fortunate to have made a lot of great financial decisions over the course of my life, and I've made a ton of terrible ones. I've made all the financial mistakes you can make. And I have to say that so that I'm relatable. I'm not some,
Okay.
I'm not
Some guru, right?
some stuffed suit up there who is just
Yeah.
talking about you need to be contributing this much money and and save and invest and blah 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 blah. That's vapid and it falls flat from my perspective. So I need to be relatable. And then I talk about all the stuff that I talk about. I talk about the more squishy stuff. I talk about how important it is to have a compelling vision for your future that is pulling you towards it versus me trying to push myself or white knuckle myself to do uncomfortable
Mm,
financial things. So let me get this straight. I'm supposed to cut my spending just for the sake of cutting my spending? Well, that's not going to work. That's not sustainable.
yeah.
But if I'm going to take a step back and cut spending so that I can help my kids do A, B, C, or D, that's more palatable. I can do that. So everything is interrelated. I need
Yeah.
to be thinking about what I want ultimately, so it's pulling me towards it versus me trying to push myself to do stuff I don't really want to do and live less. That sucks.
So if I understand you right, you could say that you've got things that you don't want to do, right? So taking the bitter medicine because it's going to be good for you, cutting your expenses, right? But it can be transformed into something that, even though you wouldn't choose to do it just for its own sake, it can be something that you actually do maybe desire to do, and can take pride in because you're placing it in a larger, more meaningful framework. And it could be your kids, or it could be like financial security, so that you can move from a job that you don't like into a job that you find more appealing, even though it's not as remunerative. So we would call this figuring out the not just means and ends, but which ends you should be pursuing. Do you have to do, when you're counseling clients or working with people in seminars, do you have to get them to open up and say what it is that they want, and then steer them towards that? Or once you've said this to them, do you see like a light bulb go off in their head? How much hands-on do you have to be in helping people figure out what's really good for them and what it is that they really want, and then get them to see money as part of that?
Yeah, and the answer to that question is, of
It
course,
depends.
that also depends. But that is my premise.
Mm,
That I want to change the conversation and change the way that people think about money and the relationship that they have with money. And if we can do that away from just that this is an intimidating thing or uncomfortable
yeah.
thing or something I'm bad at, because that's a whole nother thing, is what I believe, what my beliefs around money and success and wealth
Yeah.
and all these things are. So if we can help people to frame it differently and just to get off where I'm currently at with money and move more towards this different area, I think that is helpful.
I imagine there's probably two correlative mistaken attitudes that people have. When you just mentioned one, I'm bad at money, therefore probably, we can spin out a whole bunch of concepts. I'm never going to be successful. It doesn't matter what I do. I'm just screwed because I'm not good at this. But I imagine at the other end, you have people who think that they're financial wizards, and it just never turns out their way. If the economy had turned this way, they would have made a killing. But unfortunately, they bought, I don't know, some crazy commodity. They shouldn't be doing commodities trading. Or they invested in crypto in the wrong time, or NFTs. Think about that. Oh, we're going to change the entire economy with NFTs. So I hope that most clients are somewhere in between that, but you must have to deal with people at times who think that they understand things better than they do. And so in a way, to bring up another philosophical person, that's sort of like, what we call Socrates, Elenchus, his like showing people, no, they don't know as much as they think. So it prepares the way for saying, okay, now let's do this. Do you end up having to do that with clients? And if you do so, obviously you're probably not like deflating them like Socrates did, because you don't want them to feel terrible. But you do have to say, no, you're actually, this is wrong. Your information is wrong. This is why you're having trouble. So do you have clients like that who you have to steer away from their own presumption of knowledge when they don't have it?
For sure. I think that we all interact with money. So therefore, and you've been interacting with money for however long you've been interacting it. So have I, just like I've been driving. So yeah. I think I'm a better driver than all the other drivers on the road, right? We all have these, these overconfidence biases. And so, yeah, for sure. I try and approach it. I try to disarm people. So okay. I'm not trying to present myself as an expert. I'm trying to present myself as somebody who has experienced similar problems to what you are potentially experiencing. And let me share with you how I've found the solution, or what's worked for me to help to get there. And then I'll certainly present information that is, for lack of a better term, factual and the numbers based. So you sort of present from an emotional standpoint, and then back it up with logical kind of stuff, like the conversation about why $1 million is a worthwhile goal for saving money, what that translates into. That's compelling enough to move some people to action. But for a lot of people, we need a little bit more work and a little bit more thought to go into it than just, okay, got it. Check. I'm going to start saving $1,000 a month, and I'll do that for the next 20 years, and I'll have that $1 million, and then I'll have the 70, and I'm good. And then they do it. It's amazing. But that's less common than it is common.
It's interesting because the approaches that you're mentioning, it like corresponds almost exactly to when Aristotle in the Art of Rhetoric is talking about the three main modes of persuasion. There's logos, providing some sort of a counter argument. In this case, it'd be statistical reasoning. Look, if you do this, this is going to happen here. Here's what compounding interest looks like, And then there's pathos, which is the emotional side, which needs to be explored as well. But then there's this dimension of ethos, which Aristotle actually says is the most convincing of the means to persuasion. And we translate that as character. But, when I think about what he says throughout the rest of the work, the sort of thing that you were talking about, the approach of, listen, I'm not coming down from on high as an expert who simply knows everything. That's the logo side. I've made some of the same mistakes. I'm relatable. And he also says too, that part of what makes a speaker persuasive in this respect is that we not only think they're competent and decent people, but they have goodwill to us. Eunoia in Greek, that they care about us is a way we would say it, So, I care that, this person is financially successful, even though they're just a client. They're not, my friend, my buddy, my family member, but to have that, projection of care which I think people can fake it for a while, but not very long. If you're going to have an ongoing relationship that has to be sustained by being genuine. So it's interesting that you say this, because you put all three of these together and you get a very powerful package, you could say, for getting people to do the things that you want them to do. And in your case, it's not just, oh, I want to sell you a product. It's more, like you said, I want people to understand money so they can live a better life. So you've got a message, and you're projecting it out there using all of these techniques. Now, was that deliberate on your part? Did you at some point say, I need to attend to the emotional side, but I also need to do this, and I need to do this? Or did you just kind of happen into it successfully?
I can remember being or sitting in a meeting, and the gentleman, his name was Randy Marshall, got up and he was talking about how people seek a purpose-driven life and you have the ability to help them get it.
Yeah.
And this was in the context of recruiting people into the financial industry.
Okay.
So there was 6 years where I did that function. And that really taught me, because that really clicked with me. Moses, without vision, the people perish. And people want to feel good about their work. And people want to feel good about it's. There's a lot of people that most people don't want to be financial experts. They just want to know that I have peace of mind that what I'm doing is going to translate into the result that I want. So am I smart enough to have put all that together? Maybe. But I think just over time, because I've been doing this for 23, 24 years, realizing what is going to actually get somebody's attention. That is the most important thing, because
so it varies from client to client, right? So sometimes you'll be more on the logical approach, sometimes more on the emotional.
For sure. And I don't do a lot of individual financial planning. I message to large groups of people. So I work with working class people. Those are the folks that I'm interested in working with, and who I do interact with most commonly. There are a lot of wonderful financial advisors out there who are doing very sophisticated financial stuff. And that's not me. I'm talking about the blocking and the tackling, the behaviors. And just recognizing everything that goes into money. It's so charged. We're embarrassed. We have shame. Our parents told us to never talk about it with anybody else. And that's not good. That's, if I am struggling with something, the opposite of what I should be doing is just putting my head in the sand. So I recognize that. And I've felt that way too. I have also had these feelings, and still occasionally do. So I get it. And I think I'm a very empathetic person. Whether my wife would tell you that that's the case, or my friends would tell you that, I think that they would, all kidding aside. So I try and have conversations with people the way that I want to process information, while also being respectful and trying to figure out how they want to receive information. So
that's incredibly important. Going back to the aspect of rhetoric, Aristotle got that. He says every kind of teaching involves persuasion. You got to get people interested in what you're saying. And we've all had professors who didn't know that lesson. They assumed that whatever it is that they're saying, or people do presentations like that, right? They put up a PowerPoint and they're like, you're going to find this fascinating because I do, and then our eyes are glazing over. So that's quite important. I want to go back to the thing about working people. So in a way, what you're doing in terms of like human happiness gets a much greater bang for the buck, because you are speaking to large numbers of people, and there's way more working class people than there are, people who have the financial resources to engage in these very sophisticated schemes that you were just referencing before. And maybe with we talk about marginal utility. You buy your second yacht, how much of a boost do you get from that compared to actually not being in debt, paying off a mortgage, being able to send your kid to college, and not say, oh, we can't afford anything, we can actually take you out for dinner. These kind of, so they seem kind of trivial, but they're actually very important for people. When I talk to my students, the things that they remember are precisely those, that mom and dad took them to this place in Milwaukee, and it was great because it was, out of the ordinary for them. They couldn't afford it. So did you choose, was this a deliberate thing where you're like, listen, I want to work primarily with and reach working class people to help them better understand money? Or was it just, something that you happened into, or is it a combination of both, where you're at a certain point, you're like, holy crap, this is what I'm doing, and let me get good at doing this?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that question. There's so many different ways to have a successful financial services career. I started out selling life insurance, so I did that for 7 years.
Okay.
And then I went into management within that sort of arena and did that for 6 years. And after that 13 years, I kind of looked around and said, where do I fit in? Do I fit into this at all, to financial services? And it was sort of a, whatever the term there is, an existential moment. And I
Right.
settled on,
Exactly. Yeah.
essentially retirement planning. And that brought me to working with 401k plans for
Okay.
companies, because it gave me the opportunity to work with large numbers of people without doing it one at a time. So I
Yeah.
get the opportunity to go into these companies and to do the kind of work that we've been talking about, and to message. And the vast majority, 80% of Americans, or whatever the number is, most will never interact one-on-one with a financial professional or financial advisor. It's just the way that it is. So I view my work as, how do I bridge that gap or close that gap using technology and everything that's available to me to have an interaction without kind of having that one-on-one interaction.
Yeah. Now, so coming back to the podcast, in a way, the podcast supports that kind of work. And I think, so let's think about the sort of stereotypes of ordinary working people, because they're not so interested in finances, or they think I'm bad at money. They might not actually listen to a podcast about money matters, because they're like, well, that's not for me, that's for smarter people than me. And we know that, like, working class people, talent, intelligence is pretty well distributed across every vector. It's not like, people working in the C-suite are actually way smarter than everybody else. That's just not the case. And you can see this in universities too, that elite universities, professors, and, people working in community college, not a huge difference other than access, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you wanted to make a pitch, a really broad pitch, to why the ordinary working Joe or Josephine should listen to the podcast. Now, it's not just a podcast about money, as we pointed out. It's all sorts of other things as well. And you weren't just going to use the pitch that you use over and over again, which is a great pitch, by the way, but you have to, like, pick something different. How would you do it? What pitch would you make to them
To
listening to
get
this
people
pod?
to listen to the podcast?
Yeah, a new audience.
Yeah, I'd say that it's not the AM radio financial talk that
Oh,
that people who are interested in that kind of thing
right.
would enjoy. I think that if you're an avid personal financial person or an avid stock market investor, you probably won't enjoy the podcast. You'll probably find it to be too basic. But if you are somebody who's interested in listening for a short little 20-minute amount of time and learning something that you can take and put to work in your life immediately, then it's probably a good show for you. It's not going to teach you the ins and outs of taxation on an
Right.
international entity. It's not going to do that, but it'll teach you from a behavioral standpoint how to create a good new habit, or how to reframe thinking
Okay.
about something that you're uncomfortable with,
Yeah.
how to overcome a problem that you've been struggling with. It'll give you frameworks, step by step. How do I put this actually into action? Hopefully quickly.
Okay. I think that's a great pitch. So now I got a couple questions for you about the podcast. And I think to some people, some guests, and perhaps to some listeners or viewers, they would seem like they're softball questions, but I suspect that they're not, because you've got over 2,000 episodes now. So if I ask you, what is your favorite episode? Is that a question you can actually answer? Or is it like, people ask me, like, who's your favorite band? And I'd be like, well, if I was 16, I could say Iron Maiden, but I've got so many that I really, really like. And, deciding, is this one better than this one? I find myself incapable sometimes. So what's your response to favorite episode of your own podcast?
I've had a guest on named Jamie Lerner, and she is I think she was a psychotherapist. She's been on twice.
Okay.
And she gave me the language of, you have choice. And it's so simple and so profound that from a Stoic standpoint, we know that, I don't have control over the circumstances, but I get to choose how I think, feel, and respond to those circumstances. And her
Right.
framing of it, you have choice. You get to choose how you feel about everything. You choose, nobody else. Saying, well, and she told me I was wrong a couple of times too, which is great. I
that's
try to,
interesting. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm trying to figure it out. Like, how does that work? She says, no. So I'd say if I had to pick one or two, probably that episode with Jamie, the first one. So that would be my answer.
Well, that's great. I thought maybe you wouldn't be able, you'd be like, there's so many, something like, how do you balance them out? But, being able to give a fundamental reason for it, that's quite important. I'm not going to ask you, like, what was the least favorite one, but were there any where, I'll put it to you this way, where something went off the rails? Could be technical, could be like sort of you thought the person was going to be a great guest and they just like wouldn't talk, it's dead air, or something along those lines. And what did you do?
For sure. Well, after doing something for 5 or 6 years, however long it's been, we've screwed stuff up big time for sure, and had to re-record. I think I've gone through an entire interview without recording it. I'm like, oh no. So I had to reach out to the person and be like, we had a great conversation, but we need to do it again, if you'd be willing to do that.
How did they take to that?
Everybody's been very understanding of it.
Oh, good.
We know that stuff happens. So, but to a person, whenever somebody comes on and we're having our chit chat beforehand, and this has happened probably 5 times, they say, oh, I'm really looking forward to a great back and forth and having a great conversation. I'm like, uh-oh. And they just talked the entire time.
Oh.
I introduced them and that was it. I could have left the room. Literally.
So is that like a tell phrase for that then?
Well, it has been, when people are just like, we're going to have just this great back and forth discussion. Like, that's what I was assuming we were going to do.
Maybe the fact that they needed to like emphasize it is
exactly
the sign.
Like,
yeah.
Uh-oh, that's a red flag. I can zone out of this one.
Yeah. So what do you have planned next for the podcast? It's an incredible pace of work. You could just like keep doing what you're doing and that would be awesome. But are there any other ideas that you're kicking around, or, format changes or things like that on the horizon?
So I discovered a couple of years ago that we had so many guests and kind of this cool community of folks that they're consultants or they're writers, they have offerings. So we created the website. I appreciate you checking it out. I'm proud of that, where people can come and listen to the shows. Obviously, they can read written content from our guests. They can engage directly.
Nice too. The transcripts are awesome.
And they also, a lot of them will provide blog content for the site. They have the coaching, there's courses that are, it's all guest generated. I guess so it's kind of a cool ecosystem. And we're looking to just expand offerings and be a place where people can come, and the whole idea is to get better. So I see a world where we do consistent monthly events, and there's the 6 areas of the show that you mentioned. It's wealth, success, business, lifestyle, relationships,
health,
and health. Thank you. where we can do, like, one of our guests will do a live kind of a session where people can come and check it out. So stuff like that. We just released a journal with guests contributions to it. So trying to figure out new ways to kind of make the show different and better, and always iterating. I am
Yeah, that's
not short
very
of
impressive.
ideas, Greg.
Yeah. That's very cool. To create an online community is difficult, and then to not just create it and get people to come in, but to sustain it and to get them to not. This is one thing I haven't managed to do myself, because I've got, this big YouTube following and all that. People will talk to me a lot, right? And the YouTube stuff has led to all sorts of opportunities, for my own coaching or speech, giving speeches or things like that. But getting the people to directly interact with each other within a network, where I can like step back and say, all right, I'm leaving the room now. That hasn't happened for me. But I mean, from what you're saying here, there's a common umbrella, and then people are able to interact with each other. So it's not quite like a professional association. It's clearly, very diverse. But that's quite admirable. I mean, doing that is not something easy. Everybody wants to like create a new online community, but you're actually succeeding in
Well, nobody's cracked the code. And when I say nobody, I mean
it.
me. I have not cracked that code, Greg. That's that in my mind's eye. That is, I try to think about how I want to spend my time in the work I'm interested in doing. How would I like to be interacting with people? And I would like to be doing more of that. So I'm going to be working on it. And if nothing else, I am persistent and consistent. So,
Well, that's so important, right? And not actually, let me ask you this, because we're getting close to the end of time. So to persevere in things, to be persistent, to be consistent, which is I think underrated. A lot of people think, oh, I have to have a great plan, or I have to have a lot of, just like stellar talent or something, or I need to be on all the time. But really, that's not sustainable. We need to be working not at 100% all the time, but just constantly seeing things through. Um, so here's the questions. Obviously, that leads to generating good content that people can consume, enjoy, get some benefit from. So leads to the podcast, leads to these other extensions and expansions of the community. But a lot of people, and I see this with students especially, they'll be like, well, I just don't have that. I can't stick to things, some people can. I see it, it's cool that they can do that, but that's just not me. um Going back to the choice thing, you don't want to say, well, it's a matter of choice and that's why you're a lazy person, right? Because that's not helpful at all. But how do you coax people into realizing that they can actually have that stick-to-itiveness, to use a old-fashioned way of talking about it, um, and that that's a possibility for them? How do you get them to see that?
I think that all the behavior changes that I think about in my life personally, it's all very similar. Whether I want to lose
Okay.
weight, whether I want to get out of debt, whether I want to learn a new language or whatever. There's a couple of really interesting things going on there. One is that we have this superpower / weapon of mass destruction, which is my ability to rationalize things and to rationalize
Okay.
where I am. And rarely do I do that for my benefit. It's more, you know what? That's for other people. It's cool
Okay.
that this George guy has done 2,000 podcasts, but there's, that's just not for me. I have too many other obligations. I can
Yeah.
explain
Yeah.
why I'm not doing that or why I am where I am. I can figure out a way to make that make sense pretty quickly. And what that does is it just makes us small. It causes us to not go after the things that we
Mm.
truly want. So that's why it's a weapon of mass destruction. So I always try to catch myself. Am I doing this? Am I screwing myself? Am I holding myself back? Have I created a glass, my own self-imposed glass ceiling or glass
Mm.
cage? And that is where the limiting belief stuff comes in. If I think that I'm bad at money, I'm going to be bad at money. So I need to identify where it is that I am screwing myself over. I'm just bad at relationships. Oh, yeesh, yuck. That's a self-fulfilling
Yeah, yeah.
prophecy, whatever. So identifying when those are popping up. And then like Jamie Lerner was talking about, well, how do I want to feel about that? Do you want to feel like you're bad at money? No. Oh, okay. Well, then change the way that you are talking to yourself and thinking about it. And to a degree, it's that easy. You're better served by trying to pull that string and figuring out why it is you think that. For me, it was just how I grew up. My family didn't have enough money. My mom would pay bills once a month, and she spread out all of our bills on our wooden
Yep.
dining room table. And my brother and I knew to stay away because it was stressful. So month
Yeah,
after
yeah.
month after month, year after year after year, just taught me stay away from money stuff. And that manifested in me being bad at money until I realized what my head was telling me to do. Once I recognized it, then I could shift that. Say, here's how I want to feel about it. Okay,
Yeah.
it's not instantaneous, but it's closer than you think. All these changes are closer than you think. So I sort of went off on you there, but it's such an
No, it's a
important
great,
thing.
that's actually a great message.
The stories we tell
I like that.
ourselves.
The changes are closer than you think. Yeah. That could actually be like a little slogan that could put heart into people. So we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of your time. Where are the best places to find you other than just putting the podcast into Google? Lifeblood podcast. It's the first result that comes up. Where else can people find you?
If people are interested in it's lifeblood.live is the website for the show. Obviously, appreciate you talking about the podcast. If people are interested in my other work, it's moneyalignmentacademy.com. And you mentioned the purpose book at the beginning. I'm super proud of that. It's available. I haven't officially launched it, whatever that means, but you can find the purpose book on Amazon as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving some time in your morning. I know it's very early there in Arizona. It's early here in Milwaukee. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah. And I'm grateful for the friendship that we've developed over the past 5 or 6 years. You've been on the Lifeblood podcast 4 times, I think, Greg. So that's been awesome. And they have certainly been, without question, some of my favorites. And if you want
thanks.
to, if you want to check out if you want to see my learning take place in real time, listen to the first time we talked and then listen to the last time we talked. And I think that you'll see that that I improved as a host and hopefully a thinker as well. So